Committee to order. Today is October the 19th. Um,
McBride,
Here.
Joe Walker, Barron,
Here.
Mackey,
Here.
Newton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Item 2 is approval of minutes from April 29th, 2021 on pages 3 to 6.
So moved. Second.
It has been moved properly second. Questions?
McBride. I'm calling the vote. McBride,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Newton. Motion passes.
The third item is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any corrections? Discussions? Not, call the roll, please. Oh,
Motion
can
to
I have a
approve.
motion to adopt?
Second.
It has been moved improperly second.
Question.
Yes, ma'am?
Discussion. So I have the agenda before me, but I don't have any additional documentation in addition to this. Is that correct, Ms. McBride?
Yes, I think you should have your minutes
Oh,
attached.
yes, that
Yes,
was here,
mhm,
okay.
that's right, we'll have presentation.
Okay, thank you.
McBride,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Newton. Motion passes.
Thank you. Fourth item is a status report of the DSS relocation to Columbia Mall and our state partnership. Administrator Brown.
Yes, good afternoon. Specific to item 4, I don't want to, can you not hear me clearly? I apologize. Specific to item 4, this item, members will also see in the council's agenda packet, but the committee should be aware that staff had an initial meeting with DSS. We had a follow-up meeting with DSS, as well as some of the partners that house in the same facility that they have, and learned of some new personnel that we need to include in our discussions related to their Medicaid partners. But since that time, we have also spoken with a couple of members who had communicated to us, similar to the council members on the state level, that they want to help us move forward with this project. So they were going to try to help us make sure we were having valid information from the Department of Social Services for their space needs. If you recall, we had asked them for information about their space needs, and they used a model that the state uses to identify their space needs. That identification, from our perspective, only yielded 6,000 more square feet than they currently are occupying and using. So they went from 42,000 to 48,000 square feet. From our perspective, we did not think that that was an appropriate amount of additional space for future growth. And we talked to them about that. So they were going to go back and revisit what they had done to make sure that they were compensating for future growth. They did also communicate that with the changing in how facilities are being staffed, that they did anticipate some level of reduction because they would not have everybody working in office spaces as they traditionally would. But we still wanted to make sure that there was adequate space for what they were going to need, even if that were the case. And so that's where we left things off. So we are also had spoken with them about providing us with a blueprints of a building that was happening, I believe, out in Charleston, Ms. McBride,
Yes.
where they would have a facility going up out there, and to utilize that potentially as also a platform for our design with that particular agency. So that's where things stand with DSS. We're looking to have another follow-up communication from them here, hopefully next week, with some new space information. But we are staying in connection with them, and we're also utilizing other resources to try to help move that forward, so we can get to a point to where we're talking about true design, like we are with, for example, the public safety complex.
And let me add is that, and I want to thank Mr. Brown and his staff because we are giving DSS the courtesy of having them involved in the process. But it is our facility for them. And we're looking to be a bit more progressive and sort of think in the future in terms of the facility and having a really good prototype and not just trying to find anything to replace the old DSS. So that's one of the progressive moves that Richland County is moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Brown. And I wanted to make sure that because this came out of the Renaissance Committee, that the committee members were updated. And I know that we will be having this discussion maybe. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for that update. I did have a couple of questions.
Okay.
And the first question, you mentioned some new partners.
Wait, we're gonna get for that. Could you hold that question?
Okay. Okay, so.
That was just I just wanted him to do the partnership and
Okay.
then to get more into
Okay,
details.
I'll just hold.
Hold it for a minute?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll hold both of my questions.
Okay. So I thought it was important for us to know where the state was in terms of partnering with us, Mr. Brown. So that part is going on,
Correct.
moving forward, right?
That-
And I know we have to do the funding and all of that with the state. So that's what the primary concern right there was, that we are still negotiating and meeting with the state partners.
We
in
are.
terms
We do have, for lack of a better term, a sponsor who is willing to take this on the state side and try to help provide connectivity between funding and from ARP funding to affect this program. So we're hopeful for that. But I mean, obviously, it's not a guarantee, but we do have someone that's committed to doing that for us.
Okay, so that was the process I was wondering about, the status of that.
Yes, ma'am. So that's where that is. So hopefully what we'll do is we'll be able to have something in hand that communicates that within the next couple of weeks. But the last phone call that we had last week was that for us to provide the template to be used for that, and then our sponsor would take that.
Okay. Everyone clear?
So to follow up on the comment that you just made, Mr. Brown, that means that the timeline is a few weeks for the next step.
Correct.
Okay.
And by that I mean like next week, because this week was kind of a part of that conversation.
Thank you.
The next item is item 5 for discussion. And under that, I had the state agency social service space provisions and listed, I listed some of the areas, the entities that you had provided. So, Ms. Barron, do you want Mr. Brown to sort of go over this part and then you address your questions, or? That's fine. That's fine. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So the ideal here, members of council, is what we believe would be a potential project, a larger project for Richland County to do. We already were going to address this area. The council already approved us to address DSS. The idea was that utilizing the potential of ARP funding, I'm not saying that this has been approved by anybody, that's not where I'm going, but the idea was we know that social services provided in a community where there's low to moderate income, where there are opportunities for improved healthcare services, social services, and those type of community activities, that could be an instrument that we could potentially use separate and apart from, or in a partnership with our own dollars. So the thought was Richland County already is responsible for housing multiple state agencies. There's a function that you have to do. So then in addition to the DSS agency that you would have in that facility, then like you kind of had in the 2020 and 2000 Hampton facilities, you would have all of these state agencies in one area. So that way then those communities will be able to access the Columbia Place Mall, utilizing the transit lines if that's where they want to catch. We know that that's right there on the route, and they would have access kind of almost to a one-stop shop, which I know has been a conversation that I believe this council has had before. So the idea with these state agencies that are listed may not be all-inclusive, but these are ones that we know today that we are responsible for, in some respects, providing space for. And so we will be putting everyone kind of under one roof. And that's kind of the idea that we were looking at discussing and potentially getting feedback from the council beyond just the DSS approval that we've already received.
That was the whole concept, you're correct, Mr. Brown, to have like a one-stop shop in the area. And that would include all of the social services. And of course, the location was a central location. Could you tell us, from the agencies listed before, which ones the county is responsible for
Right,
providing?
so we definitely have social services, DHHS. I don't believe that we're required for United Way to provide space for them. But your state agencies that are listed here, I'm not sure about the health department. If we're required to do space for the health department, but social services, DHS, DHHS,
What's that, DH?
Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am. And under that, you kind of have like your Medicaid program that will fall under the Department of Health and Human Services,
Okay.
for example. Your Department of Mental Health, and there may be some other ones that we were trying to figure out across the county where we had all these different agencies located, because some are no longer, they're not here, they're spread out in other areas. And so that was one of the things we were trying to identify, is who all is the county required to fund, and do those services fit for this style location where folks could have access to this, if you will, idea of one-stop shop. So that has not all been validated, Ms. McBride, but that's what we were attempting to do to make sure we had all those vehicles identified.
now, I think we already have some that are already co-housed with a DSS at the facility. Which ones are they?
That's gonna be your DHHS.
Okay, so they are already there with the facility.
Right,
So,
and one of the key things to remember is some of these agencies are co-located, and by specific way the buildings are currently set up, they, I guess, kind of meet certain requirements, but in some respects they really need to be separate. They need to be together, it's fine, but there needs to be a separation between the agencies. So we have to make sure that whatever we do going forward with these agencies, that they can be partnered in a similar space, but they can be housed under the same roof, but they should still be separate. So that's something that was brought to our attention as well as we look to move this in a different direction than we have it today.
let me ask this. DSS and DHHS, and are required,
We know
We
for a
rec-
fact those two are required.
okay.
Yes,
thank
ma'am.
you. Ms. Barron?
Thank you, Ms. McBride. And Administrator Brown, you did answer my question that I did have about the partners. But I do have a question as we look at creating this one-stop shop. Have we assessed, we know that DSS needs a new building. Without a shadow of a doubt, we know that. But have we also assessed the buildings that we are talking about, having them co-locate and be a part of this one-shop project? Because if we, and I'm just kind of going in my head, if we do co-locate these programs and move them all under one building or down at Columbia Mall, then now have we created another challenge with now excess of inventory and properties that we will have?
Very good question.
How are we looking at that?
So in two parts, what you will find is a lot of times we're leasing space for other folks. So we have a lot of county facilities, but not necessarily all of those county facilities are spaces that we have people housed in that we would want to keep them housed in. So between leasing and then having spaces where we want to keep people in, those are potential inventory turnovers that we might want to ultimately get rid of. And this is not new, actually, when you start looking at some of this. These are some of the same things that the previous council members and previous staff were looking at, is trying to figure out how to utilize current county space that we can keep and what do we need to get rid of. So that's also a process that we'll be going through. We won't try to do it all at one big swoop, because if we do it that way, it's going to be so time consuming. So we will be coming to you and council members within your districts and saying, these are items that are currently people are asking about. we don't see a particular need as staff, and we believe that this item could be turned back over to the tax roll. Is there anything in you as a council member in that district that would prevent that from happening, or you have some thoughts on that as we take that to council? Because that's also part of our property and disposal process. So we have a lot of things tied up in making a determination about what we're going to do with facilities. And what happens is, because we haven't made a big, huge decision, we tie up a lot of small decisions. So we have to start, in my opinion, parsing that out. And that gets to the point of your question. So the first thing would be, if anybody's in a leased facility, that would make sense, because now we're not paying that lease. If they're in a dilapidated facility, similar to what you're talking about now with DSS, then from a health and safety standpoint, we want to get them out of there anyway. So that also decreases the liability that we have and the money that we're spending on trying to keep people in the facilities that are not ideal. So we're trying to navigate all of that, and that's what makes it a little bit more, I guess, convoluted, but we are trying to address all of those same issues. So it's a very good question.
And I'm shifting gears a little bit to the funding. You mentioned earlier that there was some funding, potential funding, I'll say that, potential funding from the state. And then also obviously we're gonna need some additional dollars to match those funds or to supplement for this project. Is that?
So this project technically is going to happen. The DSS is going to happen because you've already said it's going to happen. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to now utilize it as a platform for all the other things that are surrounding that. So technically, and I know that we talked to a couple of folks from Ways and Means who said the only way we're giving money is if there's kind of matching money. So we're already going to be putting a substantial amount in regardless. And that's why I said we're going to do our project anyway, but it would certainly help if we could bring along those state agencies and also have the state commit to some dollar amount to support that transition of services, whether it's FF&E, fixed furniture and equipment, which is certainly a big deal, so that we're not talking about that side of the ledger as well. But those things are not final, so it won't stop us from doing what we're doing on the DSS side or any other thing that the council wants to do. But it certainly will be a good partnership, and it will make sense because the state will be in a position to address their needs and provide a better environment for their workers.
Let me just add, the intent when we said DSS, the intent was those other partners that are already in there, but we just termed it DSS, not knowing that DHHS was different from it, but we knew that they were in there and that they would be co-located.
And there may be another agency in there too, in that same facility today,
Yeah.
beyond those two entities, if I'm not mistaken.
They are county, I guess by ordinance or law, we're obligated to support the facilities for them.
That's correct.
My last question, Ms. McBride, and that is, when we're talking about this funding from the state level, and it's coming from the Ways and Means Committee, of course, but do we know, is this a part of their federal allotment as a part of the Rescue Act, or because I'm concerned that, I'm hearing people are getting these funds from the state already, and I don't want us to miss out if that's the case, that we're getting that from that same pot of money.
Right, and I'm not going to speak out of turn. When I was at the South Carolina Water Utility Forum, I can't remember what his name is yet, but it was two gentlemen there that both talked about working with that committee. And what they focused on was that they were still going through their process. I didn't get the indication that anybody had gotten any money, but that if anybody were get money, that their purview was going to be, you got to put up. So in my conversation with our potential sponsor, again, the idea was the same thing. You're going to have skin in the game. There's still no guarantee, but that's why we're not focusing on we have to get that, because You know, that would not be smart. And while I'm certainly hoping the state would support us in every way, the first time the money went around with COVID, it didn't go that way for not just Richland County, for other people within the state. But this is a different time around, and who knows? So we're going to put a program together. It's going to make sense, and we're going to try to see if we can't get some additional funding. But I do not believe that funding has been approved that we have missed out on. I don't think that's the case.
Thank you.
Let me just take this time to welcome Mr. Walker, and you came in at the right time.
Thank you. I apologize for my tardiness.
We're discussing DSS and the partnerships with the state. I know I'll let Ms. Newton speak and then give you the opportunity to speak should you like. Okay, Ms.
Thank you.
Newton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Brown, one of the things that you mentioned was taking a look at property that the county has and having those conversations. So that's on the disposition side. But I'm curious if you can update me on the status. Part of the renaissance that we talked about were obviously facilities is, for my information, where do we stand with identifying all of the facilities needs that we have as a county, so that we're in a position to prioritize those and understand how all of the things that we're doing fit into the comprehensive picture for the county?
So
Unless you got time, could we hold that? Unless you're prepared for it, because that could end up being a really big.
it's a larger question, but I want to respond to her and let her know that
Okay.
things are happening. So to your question, there are probably three components, and one is a part of this discussion. So you have the identified needs associated with your magistrates, which we're familiar with. You've got the identified needs associated with your fire service, which we are aware of. You have your identified needs that are associated somewhat with certain spaces in this facility, but you have also opened up some spaces since that time because you've had individuals vacate the 2000 Hampton side. So, and that's created some space availability that did not exist before that happened. So, in terms of your question, the entirety of the picture in the comprehensive look, things have changed with some of the ability that we have now with those space needs. So we are still looking at that, and also we have changed some staff that no longer even work in the facility because COVID opened that up, and so we have folks who work remotely permanently. So that comprehensive look now has changed from what it was before. So we believe that, I would say, Ms. Newton, as a part of this process, probably, I don't want to say running concurrent with the strategic planning process, but before the end of the year, I think we'll have a good picture for what our total needs are going to look like going forward as a county for space.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Let me also welcome Chairman Livingston. Mr. Walker, did you want to add anything about the partnership, or are you good?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to ask you to rehash anything I missed because of my tardiness, but I would encourage this body and administration to move with all due haste based on the conditions on the ground. Thank you.
All right, so are there any other questions regarding 5A? 1 through 6? The only thing I have is that United Way Dental Eye Clinic, that's not really a part of our county responsibilities, or is it?
No, I don't think it's a part of our county
Okay.
responsibilities. They just are housed in our facility as one of those services that are provided.
In which facility?
2000 Hampton.
Oh, they are?
Yes,
Oh,
ma'am.
here,
Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
okay. Yes, ma'am.
My understanding or my thought regarding the United Way is that, yes, you're correct. We don't have a legal obligation to them for the state, but that they had signed like a lease agreement. So we are operating on a contractual basis with them. Is that correct?
That may be, Ms. Newton. I'm not sure about
Okay.
that, but I could find out.
Gotcha. That's my understanding. I could be wrong.
Well, I am concerned, of course, with all of the agencies that work together, but mainly those that, my primary concern would be those that we're obligated. But I
Right.
think it would be a good idea to work with all of them.
I only mentioned that in case there were legal obligations that we had to keep in mind just per terms of the lease, that's all.
I know Ms. Barron mentioned some, so there may be others that we would want to include, so I don't want to just pull out one that's not obligated by the state to say this is what we're supporting. Okay, so, the next item is item 5B. I'm going to skip 5B if it's okay and go to 5C in case, Mr. Pugh comes in, because he wanted to speak antique mall, utilization, if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am?
That's a, all right, so, the blight removal initiative, could you sort of,
Yes, ma'am. I believe, Ms. McBride, one of the things that we had discussed in our meeting was you thought that it would make sense for this potentially to be a larger initiative, including in our strategic planning process, and that you just kind of wanted to have the discussion about some of the things that were going on now within the county, but to kind of codify that as a part of a key initiative in the strategic planning process. So one of the things I would share with this committee in particular is many of you have contacted us about items or blighted areas, whether it's overgrown vegetation, furniture, trash, and our staff, as you probably have seen, are very quick to respond. What we found out is that it's like a double-edged sword. So the good thing is the area gets cleaned up. What we found out is when we do that, we remove the opportunity for us to provide penalty to the individuals if there's a particular individual space that's been identified. So if we go out and clean up an area where there's a homeowner or a property owner, then now we no longer have the ability to charge those individuals for that cleanup if the prerequisite time has not run its course and the civil process has not taken place. So I just want you to be aware of that, not because it's a problem, because it's getting cleaned up, but when we talk about accountability and holding people accountable, we take that away when we do that. So, and that's just something that I found out that it's an unintentional consequence of taking on the ownership of cleaning some of those blighted areas up.
Brown, there was a great deal of work done on the blight removal initiative in terms of identifying in each district blighted areas, and I forgot the terminology they use in identifying these areas. But a lot of work was put into this. I don't know if Dr. Thompson remembers it or if Ms. Harris, is she coming, Ms. Harris? Oh, there she is. If anybody remembers the amount of work that was done for the blight removal, and I don't know, other than Mr. Livingston, but I don't know if anybody else on council was here. So it was a significant amount of work that was done in identifying in each one of your districts really blighted areas that needed to be addressed. And also looking at how we're using our code enforcement officers, because at one time, all the code enforcement officers, or a number of them were a part of Richland County administration, and then we moved those over to the sheriff. So there is some confusion about or concerns about our code enforcement and being able to help our communities with the blight area.
And what I can do, Ms. McBride, is I can take from this and go find out what that was in those spaces that were identified. I can also tell you, how many employees that we have that are, when we say code enforcement, their job is literally to go out and work blighted areas and that type of thing from an administration standpoint. The last time I think we had this discussion, it was my understanding that we had 4 individuals that were under the purview of the administrator that were actually code enforcement for the purpose of these types of issues. And we had communicated that code enforcement as a language just identified the ability for folks to effectuate county policy, but it's not the same thing as people going out and dealing with, blighted areas or other specific codes related to, overgrown vegetation, trash, all of that type of thing. So
That may be something that the report in the committee may want to look into greater detail in that area. Because I know that many council members have expressed concerns over the blight. And are there any questions? So the next item is the antique mall utilization and potential use. And that was, the antique mall is located on Broad River. And it's been, again, a number of different discussions and communications regarding this. So, Mr. Brown, can you sort of bring us up to date on, it was a very convoluted issue, I know.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm gonna stop me at any point, members of the committee. So the last true conversation that we had about the antique mall stemmed from a conversation as to whether or not the committee at that time would utilize CDBG funding that could be used to provide a facade, which was one of the items, or not necessarily, or whether or not that would be considered as a magistrate / substation for sheriff's department. Out of that discussion, a couple of things happened. One of the things that happened is that Ms. Newton, I don't know if she recalls this, but Ms. Newton had talked about creating a priority of magistrate projects so that the committee and council could ultimately understand how the magistrate was going to prioritize what facilities would be taken care of. So that was something that's supposed to come back to this committee. Since that time, the council approved CIP funding in amount of $8 million for magistrate facilities. The magistrate, in order to be able to utilize that funding, is supposed to come back and kind of go through that list with you. So that's something that actually needs to come back through this committee. So this committee, Ms. McBride, I know we'll need to meet in order so that the chief magistrate will be able to then kind of just deal with, in general, magistrate facilities. So that was part of that as well. Now,
Could you hold it a second?
yeah, I absolutely
So
can.
the $8 million, but they're just coming back to us regarding the antique Broad River, or are you saying
So-
that they're supposed to come back to us with all of the facilities?
Correct.
Which one?
With all of the facilities, because their priority was supposed to determine whether or not this was even, one of their priorities to use it for that purpose or not. And so they would need to come back to discuss the whole thing. These are our list of priorities. It does or does not include using the old antique mall as a magistrate / sheriff substation. I'm not saying that's what they said. I'm just telling you that would be part of that discussion. So yes, ma'am, it would include all of them, but it would have to address that because it was tied together.
And again, this was a really convoluted process with that antique mall, because part of it, the magistrate was added on to the antique mall. The
No.
magistrate facility was added on to the overall project for the antique mall.
Well, and I hear what you're saying. I'm just going by the motions and what was approved.
Okay,
You know,
what you got in.
That was supposed to happen, and it really needs to happen so that it would allow the magistrate to move forward in some shape, form, or fashion with their $8 million spend. Again, whether that's on part of this facility or not, that was just part of that whole.
That was directed for
Process.
this committee.
It was, yes,
Okay.
ma'am, it was.
Well, let me take this opportunity to let Councilman Pugh speak regarding the antique mall, because a lot of discussion with the community has gone on with that too. Mr. Pugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That comment Mr. Brown made just kind of changed it a little bit for me, but we have been in discussion with community members about what that project looks like. I'm not sure where we were before I got here on council, but for my thought process after reassessing where we were, it looked to me that the best option for us would be to level that building and make it an open air market, and I guess put a RFP out to have someone run it as if it was like Soda City in that area to help, one, give those constituents in that area an opportunity to have a place to get fresh fruits and vegetables, and to to make sure that we do something with that place that kind of fits the that fits the character of actually what's going on that block right there. Now, one of the other discussions that we had was about using the facade grant to be able to maybe paint the outside and make it look a little bit spruced up a little bit. But we all know that if we use those facade funds, that ties our hands as a governmental entity for 5 years, and we won't be able to use it for 5 years. So that's kind of where I am with the whole antique mall piece. I think that community could really benefit from a open air market style place in that specific place.
So, at this point, we're just doing the discussion because we're still looking forward to hearing about the magistrate office. And Mr. Pugh, if we could look at, if you want to continue to look at that versus the open air, or do you have a preference to get back that information from Mr. Brown?
I would love to get that information back from Mr. Brown because, as we all know, these plans were in place long before we got here on council. So we want to not stagnate the process. And as you just said a few minutes ago, we don't even know if the antique mall is included in their priority list.
Ms. Newton?
I guess I just have a general question that there are a lot of things that we need to have answered. So on the one hand, the magistrate's office is going to come to us with a list of facilities. I guess what I would wonder, and maybe it's information you could come back with, is in the event that the magistrate's office comes back and says, no, we don't want to do this, I guess what I'm wondering is, would this recommendation or desire then still be part of the Renaissance, or would it be something separate? And that's not an answer that I need right now. It's just a question that I have in terms of, where is the appropriate place to address it?
Initially, let me see if I can help a little bit. Sure. Initially, it started out with the antique mall. And then it's my understanding later that the magistrate was added to that, office added to that as a use to be included in that facility. So it just started out doing something with that antique mall.
Right. I guess I'm just wondering, as what was formerly the Renaissance has moved and shifted, if it's not going to be associated with the magistrate's office anymore. And again, I don't have a dog in the fight of where we address it. I'm just curious to know if it has to be part of this or if it would be more appropriate to be handled someplace else. So that's just a question for down the road.
I was trying to say that it was always the facility itself a part of the Renaissance, not the magistrate, which
Right,
came
but-
about.
but I'm saying-
So the facility itself was always a part and specifically identified as a part of the Renaissance.
Right, but when we, at our retreat in 2019, met and talked about the Renaissance, we trimmed down what the main focuses were. And so I'm just
Okay.
trying to have clarity on where it goes.
I guess what I'm saying is that we've gone through this a lot with the motions. It was still a part of the Renaissance from that meeting, but there are different opinions on it. So we'll let that stay as a part of the Renaissance right now. The last part, many of you and several motions have been made in discussions regarding the rebranding or renaming of the Renaissance Initiative.
Ms. McBride, I apologize for interrupting. I still had a couple more items on that previous. if you
Okay,
don't
excuse
mind.
me.
Yes, ma'am, I apologize. I'll be brief.
It's okay.
But to your point about addressing possible uses, I have received a number of inquiries related to that facility. So I need to understand from the committee's perspective how we want to address requests to utilize that facility. So you have individuals who are asking to buy it. You have individuals who are asking to lease it. You're having individuals who are asking for the county to allow them to utilize it for community purposes, everything from church purposes to allowing other social services to go out to the community, to giving out products and storing products there to be utilized as a big giveaway. So there are a number of individuals who are interested, and I want to know from the committee's perspective, how do you want to address those requests while you try to figure out what you want to do with the facility overall? Do we turn them down and say it's not available for anything, or is it another process? And I'm asking you because generally the county administrator has given the authority, for example, over this facility, as well as we rent out, the Columbia Place Mall, not the Columbia Place Mall space, the Decker Center, community space, but you don't have that for the entire county. So it's not like Mr. Brown just make a decision because you have specific spaces that you've documented and that's not included.
Are there any comments from committee members regarding that? At this time, did I miss something? Mr. Brown, I think that you said that you would like to, you expecting something soon to come from the magistrates
Yes,
regarding
ma'am.
this, and I think that once we get that, then we can bring it back to the committee and make a decision in terms of
Okay.
what we need to do and send it to council. Yes.
I guess you asked for some directive from this committee, correct?
I did.
And so I think that, because I'm sitting here, again, we have lots of agenda items, and we're just having a conversation. You asked a specific question as to what you want us to do, and I think that we should address this question. And that is, in addressing this question, how do we want to move forward with the Antique Mall? Can it be rented out, or do we put everything on hold until we hear back from the magistrates? And I, personally, I've only been here since January, but that priority list was requested then. So, do we continue to put things on hold as we wait for others when this committee can move forward with some other action? So I would just like for us to make a decision, if possible, and give some specific directives to Mr. Brown about the Antique Mall.
Thank you. We put this down as a discussion item because we wanted to share what was going on. At this point, and we didn't put it as an action item because we knew that there additional information was coming. But once that information comes, which Mr. Brown has said that he's expecting it soon, it will come back on the committee as an action item, and then we can provide more specific directions in terms of what to do. Is that okay with you, Mr. Brown, based on our conversations?
So based on your conversation, what I'll say to all the parties who are interested in that space is currently the county is not taking any action on allowing anything until it makes a determination on what it wants to do. So that's what I'm hearing the guidance will be.
And I also would like definitely for Councilman Pugh to be involved in it because this is something that he has worked on. So once we get all of that information, which he would like to see too, we would come back with discussion here for action. Mr. Livingston.
Can we get a deadline on when we want the magistrate to come back to tell us the extent to which they will be able to fit that the Antique Mall into their plan or not?
Sure, so the magistrate, put me in this position. The magistrate has a priority list. We just haven't met to give them that opportunity to address what their priority list, and since then, the chief magistrate has changed, so the magistrate is ready.
And it doesn't mean we have to accept the magistrate's recommendation,
Right.
but we want to give them that opportunity since we have been in discussion with them for a while, and then we can move forward.
Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
I guess from my perspective, in addition to that, there are a few sets of information. So there's the information from the magistrate's office. I still would like an answer to my question from whatever the motion was, just to understand if that fails, like where should this be addressed? Is it this committee item? Is it an ANF item? Where does that item appropriately go? But also, I'm wondering if my committee members would like to see a consolidated list of what these requests are for the property, because otherwise we potentially get down the road to have the conversation, and let's say hypothetically the magistrate says he doesn't want it, and then we say, well, let's pursue the other options, and then we have to say, well, what are the other options, and then we direct you to get the list. So that might just be something that can be presented as part of that information, if that's something that others are going to be interested in.
And I think that was part of Mr. Brown's plan, was to bring back all of that
Okay, I
information
missed
to
that.
us. Okay, thank
If I
you.
missed that, I apologize, Mr. Brown.
Are there other questions?
Madam
Ms.
Chair,
Mackey? Mhm.
and help me make sure I understood it correctly. So the magistrate is ready, they're just waiting for us, so do we need to give you a date in which they can come and present?
I
Is
need
that
to
what you're
just talk
saying?
to the chief magistrate, because the chief magistrates have changed since the list was prepared. But I do know that they have a prioritization list, so when I leave this meeting, not when I leave, today, I will contact the chief magistrate, let them know that we're ready for them to present to this committee. And I think they'll be asking me when they can do it.
Mr. Brown, within the next week, the next 2 weeks, you could have a meeting set up?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? On to the last item, 5D, rebranding, renaming Renaissance Initiative. This is one that, what has happened with the Renaissance is that many motions were made and approved, and then new people came on and made other motions, and it has really been a whirlwind of emotions and emotions. And we've tried to go and find the latest motions made, and we are doing the best we can with it. So you're gonna have to bear with us on this and where we're moving. But the latest one, I remember, I think Ms. Newton, you may have made it, or several people, regarding the renaming of the Renaissance Initiative. I don't know, maybe it was somebody else.
Ms. McBride, you are certainly correct that there were many motions. I can only speak to the one that I made and have no authoritative memory of others. But my motion was perhaps a little bit broader than other motions, and that what my motion said was that we evaluate it. So my motion didn't say definitively, let's rebrand it or not.
Okay.
It posed it as an item of consideration and left it open, because honestly, at this point, I don't
Okay,
know
that
if it's
wasn't
better
your
to have a
motion.
new name or be
Thank you.
the project formerly known as Renaissance, because people are always going to call it that.
Okay, thank you. There was a motion made, and maybe it was not you, regarding it was an issue brought before this committee regarding the rebranding of the renaming of the Renaissance Initiative. And I didn't want us to go any longer without bringing it up, because several council members have also mentioned it. So I've invited Mr. Brown and his staff to maybe give us a little overview, and then I would love for my colleagues to determine where they want to go with this. So,
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am. I believe you had at least an initial conversation with PIO Harris, so I'm going to turn it over to PIO Harris. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McBride.
Thank you, Ms. McBride, members of the committee.
What Dr. Thompson is passing out to the committee members is essentially a historical overview of some of the creatives that were developed to brand Renaissance. And I only made enough copies for the committee members, so Mr. Pugh, Mr. Livingston, I can get information, and Mr. Malinowski, I can get information to you at a later time. Essentially, what you have before you is a historical look at the branding of Renaissance, a historical overview. This is in no way intended to be a projection of what branding could be, should be going forward. That is something that certainly needs to be decided one way or the other. But in the packet you have there, just quickly, with Renaissance, knowing that it was a really comprehensive initiative. It wasn't just limited to building projects. It was a initiative that included, as Ms. McBride mentioned earlier, blight removal and some other aspects. So one of the things with the graphics, we really wanted to convey a spirit of transformation, community collaboration, and transparency. So that's the first thing in that document, in the packet you have. It's just this graphic element that we used and carried out throughout the branding process with Renaissance. And with that, there were just different events to help introduce the community to Renaissance, so that graphic element was included on the invitations. different handouts, that type of thing. You'll also see in there that we had promotional items, branding Renaissance. Things like tote bags and mugs were given out at community events that were held to inform residents about the initiative. Also, there's an informational booklet in there, a brief overview of Renaissance and all the different components of it. And one of the other things in the packet you have before you is just a little handout that was created for employees. We knew that we would be having a lot of community meetings. And one of the things we thought was very important to the branding of Renaissance was making sure that employees, whether at public meetings or just engaging people in their in their going about in the community, was making sure that employees knew what Renaissance was in a succinct, brief way so they can stay on message. So that's one of that handout is there. And also, we created a challenge coin, and that was developed for council members specifically and administrators to give out to organizations, businesses, even employees who exemplified the Renaissance, the spirit of Renaissance. Because again, Renaissance was a massive initiative, not just a building project. So for instance, if there was a community that really undertook blight removal seriously, maybe the council member in that district would want to present the neighborhood leader in that community with a challenge coin at a council meeting or a community event. And in addition to all of that, we also developed some brand guidelines. We thought it was real important to make sure that as we move forward with Renaissance, that things would have a consistent look, tone, and image. And so that's the brand guidelines are listed in the packet there. So again, just to sum up, this is a historical look at what we were intending to do for Renaissance. It is in no way intended to be a suggestion or recommendation from staff on what we should do, could do, or would do going forward. Again, those are decisions that need to be made going forward. And with that, I'll take any questions, if you have any.
Any questions? Ms. Harris, the Revivify Richland, that was the blight removal
Yes,
area.
ma'am. Yes,
And
ma'am,
if you
that
see in
is.
your package, that was the blight removal
Yes.
component of it. So, is there anything else?
No, Ms. McBride, no, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. And no questions? So the issue is before us, and this was intended to be a discussion period. When we come back next meeting, we would look for Ms. Barron to some actions taken so that, but I wanted to make sure that everybody had as much information as we possibly could. And we would look forward to taking actions on some of these things at our next meeting. But with the rebranding, renaming Renaissance initiative, are there any comments in terms of additional information that's needed, or where do you want to go with it? Just
Pride. So with this, just so that I can understand what you're asking, so are we looking to, when you say rebranding, we're looking to do another, something similar to what's already been created, like updated information, brochures and things of that nature? Is that what's before us to discuss?
yes, the reason it's on the agenda because several council members felt that the Renaissance needed to be renamed. Not all, but some had that concern. And I wanted to make sure that we brought this before the full committee. And if necessary, we would take council. So that's why we're here, to see whether you need to rename it or that, you know, people might be satisfied with where it is because it's moving and we're moving forward with it. And that's just a decision that the committee and council would have to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be interested in having more conversations about it. I think the branding and whatnot is fine. I think there probably needs to be some more conversation around the messaging of what is the Renaissance now, what is it moving forward? And I think those are the questions we need to have, and then really have some conversations about, does Richland Renaissance match what it is that we want to do with the property now and what we're doing moving forward?
I just,
That's why I asked Ms. Harris to come back, because a lot of effort and work went into the rebranding, and just lots of information, hard work, and it's some good information out there. But maybe, we might be able to keep what we have, or if not, change it. But you did have the opportunity to get some information. And is it anything that you would like for me to do for the next meeting regarding this? Yes, ma'am.
I do. I think that the branding is nice. Our message, or even I noticed in one of the brochures we list projects as to what's included into the Renaissance program. I think we might put ourselves in a box, because we limit ourselves if we decide to grow and add projects on. So I think if we could identify what the Renaissance looks like more in the verbiage versus locations. And so I guess instead of saying the antique mall, let's don't just name a place, but just how could a project or a building qualify to be a part of the Renaissance program? Does it make sense?
Yeah, and I think this is information that at the time was appropriate for what was used, but we just wanted to give you some background information on it. The issue is two things. There's a rename, and if you want to rename it, if you want to continue to call it Renaissance, and then the other part is the rebranding of how we use it, depending on whatever name we use. So thank you, Ms. Barron.
Madam Chair?
Ms. Mackey?
Yes, I think the DSS building and the conversations we have around that, I think is something that we all have agreed we want to continue to move forward with, regardless of, what we're doing with this branding. I definitely think we need to move forward with that as soon as possible. And, the antique mall, we seem to have some type of guidance there at the magistrate. The rest of the Renaissance plan, I think it would be good to consider somehow making sure that's definitely a key initiative in our strategic plan, that we really are addressing it soon. And like Ms. Barron talked about, what are those projects going to be, and really calling them out. So I don't know if that kind of helps give staff direction on how to move forward, but wanted to provide that.
Might be something.
I'm going to pull out parts of what Ms. Mackey said, because I don't presume to speak for her, but what I heard in part that resonates for me is two pieces. One is, I feel that it's important as part of this conversation, before you decide if you're renaming or rebranding, is, what is it? Because what was originally envisioned as the Richland Renaissance was truly broad in its scope. And extraordinarily comprehensive, and so much work went into it, and the plan won awards and all that stuff. And so I think just as part of that conversation that we're having in the strategic planning process, or wherever we have it, these are the items that it contains, because it really just got slimmed down, and then that gives us the opportunity to evaluate how we want to do it. But I feel like right now, if you asked, and this is just a guess, if you asked 11 members to say, tell us all of the things that are included in the Renaissance, not from a property perspective, but from a thematic perspective,
Okay. Excuse me,
we'd all
Ms.
say
Newton.
something different.
I'm going to
Sorry.
have to cut you short, because
Thank you. I'm
it's
done.
4:00. Okay, thank you. So we'll take all that under consideration that has been mentioned, and move forward in a direction that hopefully that satisfies the committee. At that point, we're at adjournment. Can I have a motion? A motion?
So moved.
It's been moved
Second.
and properly second. The vote,
McBride,
yes.
Joe Walker,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.